Get your caffeination on, people. It's time for science.
And I've been thinking about this ever since the last time you said it. I work at a truck, so I have a lot of time to think, as you can imagine. But
Sure.
one of the things I thought about was, what if the information, the genetic, the physical changes happen, and then out of sheer necessity, like with the lungs thing, like if you can't breathe water when you breathe air, and you go to try and breathe water and you start drowning, isn't it out of instinct for you to pull yourself to not let yourself die? So anything that would necessarily be forced genetic, evolutionary-wise, to go down that route, wouldn't they eventually just learn out of, hey, this is going to die. I'm going to die if I keep trying to drown myself.
Well, the problem is they have to learn it before they drown themselves. And I mean, just think about it. What is the instinct of a fish? If you catch a fish and put it on your boat, its instinct is to throw itself back into the water because it knows it needs to be in there to survive. I've watched it happen, hundreds of times. Some dude's got a fish. He's like, look, I caught this fish. The fish jumps out of the boat and into the water because that's where it knows it needs to be. And so as long as it has that behavior as its instinct, then if you give it lungs, it's going to drown itself and die. Whereas if that instinct changes, but it doesn't develop lungs, it throws itself out of the water, and again, it dies. The development of lungs and the behavior to force itself for survival to be out of the water has to happen at the same time. However gradual. And I don't know how that would be a gradual process. Like, I imagine you would have to have something that, in some sense, like the middle stage would have to be something that could be in both at the same time and would have to eventually lose the ability to breathe in the water, but then also lose the instinct along with the physical traits. I don't know, like, again, the fact that I can imagine it doesn't mean it's probable or possible or that there's any evidence that it actually happened. So, it seems the least likely thing to happen. Because again, you're taking something that can survive. I mean, consider the middle stage. Consider the middle stage between fish and lizard would be something that could survive on land and in water equally well, but then somehow natural selection would take away its ability to breathe underwater. Which, like, I don't know how that would be a survival benefit when you're taking away half of the environment it can survive in. Right? I don't know.
Yeah.
Anyway, speculation and hypothesis.
I'm sorry about that as well. I wasn't trying to interrupt you.
Oh, no, please.
But, and I know what I'm about to say isn't itself evolution. It's something that we see. It's called metamorphosis. But the middle stage of a tadpole and frog actually has that middle stage in it, where they are able to breathe in water and and I can imagine the beneficial. The problem with that is it's going 100% into one thing. If you're good at being in water and good at being at land, you're not good enough to out-survive stuff on land, but not good enough to survive stuff in the water.
From an evolutionary sense, survival is 100% the name of the game. In terms of anything, that the only, from what most people describe and understand it, the only really driving force behind any natural change, genetic change, biological change would be for survival benefit. So, like, I get that the frog sort of becomes like an imagined middle step there, but the problem is that the frog has then twice the genetic complexity of the fish already. Like, well, it also has as a tadpole, it also has the behavior to stay in the water and to keep itself there, whereas once it develops into its adult stage and it can breathe on land, it has the behavior of coming out of the water to breathe, what the tadpole doesn't have. So again, it needs to have all of those stages of behavior and structure all in place at the same time in order to survive, because if those don't develop together, then, again, it dies. And again, I imagine if you just think about whatever sort of fish stage would have come before that, if you think about the type of genetic changes that need to happen in the right order at the right time to go from that fish, which is purely aquatic, to the semi-aquatic amphibian, those become, the only way to get those changes is through mutation. And the types of mutations you would need to get all in the right order and at the same time become just mathematically impossible. I mean, again, it's not impossible to imagine, but it's just impossible for nature to produce that because it's not what nature does.
I do know that I have seen a few times where mathematical impossibilities have happened. Like, have you heard about that guy who got hit by lightning 3 times?
I'm sure there's a Guinness World Record that people are trying to beat.
Yeah, but my point is just we know that impossibilities can happen if given enough time. I mean,
Improbabilities are different than impossibilities, and also there is a type of improbability that is again, because the evolutionary development of anything from one kind to another is not just a single improbability; it is a series of improbabilities. So again, like I did the math before where we talked about, you know, the likelihood of mutations causing, I forget what kind of change.
Beneficial.
But I think it was like the creation of like one necessary functional protein is something like winning the lottery is you're 4 times more likely to get hit by lightning than to win the lottery, whereas you're more likely to win the lottery every day for a year than to get this one functional protein by chance. Like, so I mean, getting hit by lightning 3 times on this scale is just remarkably easy. You know, and really all you have to do is just survive and not be smart enough to go indoors when a storm comes up. So I can imagine that happening. Whereas again, we're talking about...
I was going to say, to be fair, he did kind of die after that second lightning strike, and it was his gravestone that got hit. The 3rd time.
Right, so those of you watching at home, don't try it. It's just not worth it. If you want to get into Guinness, get in for one of those, like, how many Twinkies can you eat things? Because at least, hey, if you don't get into Guinness, you got to eat a bunch of Twinkies. Getting struck by lightning is not the way to do it. But again, it's not just probability, but also again just laws of physics and chemistry that you've got entropy working against you all the time. That the probability, because again, it's not just a matter of what's improbable, but what is possible. In fact, what is likely for every step. Up the evolutionary chain, from one branch to another branch, from fish to lizard, you need a series of genetic changes, all of which increase its ability to survive, leading from one environment to another, adding structures that didn't exist, adding behaviors that didn't exist. For any mutation, the most likely thing to happen because of a mutation is a loss of function. And when you think about the kind and the number of changes that have to go right to change one kind of gene into a functional kind of gene that does a different thing or that creates a new kind of structure, again, we're not talking about just like, well, what if my fingers were 1/4 of an inch longer? Because that's a regulatory gene. That could even be regulation in later growth due to release of hormone in the brain that controls that kind of thing. But the addition of new structures and then the behaviors to use those structures, it's just at every step, the most likely thing to happen is the loss of functional genetic information so that something breaks and loses. It becomes a disease state, which makes survival harder. And so there's got to be just potentially hundreds or thousands of those for every one step, however small, up the evolutionary tree. So, like I said, it's like flipping a coin heads up 1,000 times in a row. It's not technically impossible, but it's so unlikely that it just isn't rational to think that it's ever happened. And of course, if you start off with the assumption of atheism, like if that's your a priori assumption is, well, I'm assuming first that God doesn't exist. Well, now the absolutely improbable has to happen because there's no other explanation for how you get the information-rich complexity and design of every living thing and every living cell and every genome. So once you get rid of the possibility of intelligent design, well, it has to be natural, however unlikely, and however improbable. It's the only answer you've got, and so you have to go with the improbable/impossible because you've forced yourself to. But then the problem I find is that atheists will point to evolution and go, evolution proves that God doesn't exist, which also doesn't make any sense. But even if it did, you have to first assume the atheism in order to get in order to get evolution to be the solution that's the most probable, because you've removed any other possibility. So you're kind of saying, well, because atheism, evolution, so you're using atheism as evidence for atheism and then pretending that it's based on science.
Very circular.
I get a little cynical at that point.
This is going to shock a good number of people. I actually do believe that God exists. It's one of those things where it wouldn't make sense for life to exist the way it is without. I'm sure you understand. I'm sure you understand.
I do. I teach middle school science, and one of the fun things, we've just started a unit on human anatomy and basic biological systems. And every day this week, my students, like, I've introduced some system, and one of my systems goes, "An atheist think this happened by accident?" And I go, yeah. Like, hearing it from sixth graders is just fun. Out of the mouths of babes, you know. So, like, I just tend to think that if you study anything in science well enough without the pre-assumption of atheism as blinders, if you just look at genetics, just look at what DNA is and what it does and how it works. Look at the organelles of a cell and how they're all interdependent systems that need each other and they're well designed for it. And also the machinery in the cell. Or look at microbes, like just these single-celled organisms that you find in a pond down the street are so amazingly complex. And they're made of all these little machines that work together so amazingly well that nothing we have built has ever come close to being the equivalent of a single bacteria. And yet bacteria are the things we scrape off our teeth when we brush our teeth at night, you know. And so to think, well, that bacteria just accidentally put itself together over however long you want through, you know, against the laws of probability and entropy, like, that to me just strains credulity beyond reason so obviously that by the time you even start assembling those cells into a larger system like a plant or an animal, like, you've already left atheism so far behind as being irrational that I just think if you study anything in life, or even just, you know, the laws of physics and chemistry, at some point you have to go, okay, instead of asking, does God exist, I should be asking, who is he? And then there's other good questions for that. So I'm actually teaching a class on that too right now, which is why my YouTube channel has gotten no attention. I'm failing to teach, apologetics and science on YouTube because I'm doing it in person. So I figure that's a balance.